Okay, let's start. Good day, everyone. For today, we are going to discuss the approaches to teaching literature. As future teachers, we should master these approaches to penetrate a more meaningful learning, right? Now, let's learn the four approaches. Now, we are the proponents for today. I am Miss Jane Pasaal. The rest will be Rizaldo, Regidor, Rica Plaza, and Kila. Okay, without further ado, what is a teaching approach? So, simply put, an approach is a way of looking at teaching and learning. Simply, it's about how teachers use methods and strategies to help the learners learn. Okay, so for this first approach, we have paraphrastic approach. With me, I am Ms. Jane Racy Pasal. I'm going to discuss with you what is this all about. So, for the introduction, learners in the modern language classroom often learn through techniques drawn from a variety of methods and approaches. Teachers select techniques from various approaches according to the different needs of their learners. Or clearly, it's about varying the techniques and methods depending on the learner's need. For the definition of paraphrastic approach, okay, so it refers to the approach that deals with the surface meaning of the text. From the word paraphrase, which means simplifying the original text or rewording on our own words. According to Rosley 1995, it suggests that this approach acts as a stepping stone in formulating assumptions on the author's work. It's more like we are recreating the text. So, as simple as that. Now, what's the purpose of paraphrastic approach? So, it is used to ease students' understanding of the text such that complicated terms are simplified through this. According to Talif 1995, he suggests that it also aids in letting our students have an initial idea of the text. Now, what's on your screen for today is the related literature in which the application of this approach were used, whereas Malaysian students who are kanang not good in understanding the second language could utilize paraphrastic approach to better comprehend the text. Okay, so that's the end of my discussion. For the activities for this approach, I am requesting Ms. Johan Kilab to discuss this part.
Activities for this approach could include first is teacher retells the story or a poem using simpler language. In this technique, students will be able to easily understand the structure of the text or the vocabulary being used. Next one is the use of transition using other mother tongue. Well, the students will be assisted with the language they really understand or the language they are familiar with. Third is reading paraphrase version or notes provided in the workbook or by the teachers. There will be clearer understanding, and at the same time it will expand students' vocabulary. So these activities will raise students' interest and to keep them involved in the process of learning. That's all. Next, reporter.
At this part, we are going to tackle about the moral philosophical approach. So, this approach suggests that the larger purpose of literature is to teach morality to probe philosophical questions. So, in this approach, it is expected that students incorporate moral values in lessons, and the teachers ask students the values they learn from the text, get the students to search moral values from a text, and raise students' awareness of the varied literature. So next slide. So why moral philosophical approach is important? Because learners seek moral values from a particular literary text while reading it. So next slide. So according to Rashid and Vitamani and Rahman 2010, it helps students to be aware of values of moral and philosophical and identify them that lies in their reading. Next slide. So it is also stated by Divsar 2014, students need to go beyond the text for moral and philosophical inference. Next slide. So according to Lim and Omar 2007, with this approach, teachers are able to direct students to achieve self-realization as well as self-understanding while interpreting literary works. In other words, they will be aware of the behaviors of the characters in the story. So what makes the protagonist and the villain bad or good? So next slide. So these are the activities for moral philosophical approach. First is reflective sessions. Second, discussion on moral dilemmas. Third, tell moral values to students. And fourth is self-evaluation activities. That's all for my part.
So now let's talk about language-based approach. So next slide. So language-based approach is about studying the language of the literary text will help to integrate the language and literature syllabuses more closely. It also detailed analysis of the language of the literary text will help students to make meaningful interpretation or inform evaluation of it. So next slide. Students are encouraged to draw on their knowledge of familiar grammatical, lexical categories to make judgments of the text. So, in short, literary texts are seen as means to helping students improve language proficiency by providing exposure to the target language and connecting them to specific vocabulary and other aspects of the language. So, next slide. And also, language-based approach is one of the method of the teaching literature in English that use literary text for the specific drills, designed to build the languages skills rather than focusing on the literary skills. So next slide. So there are two main objectives from the usage of this approach. So first, students are expected to be able to make meaningful interpretations of the text itself. Second is expand students' knowledge and awareness towards the language. So next slide. So So why do you think language-based approach is important? So because this approach is kindly be the one of the best approach of teaching literature because of its precisely concern on the aesthetic value of one's literature. Also, this approach creates awareness of the language used in classroom. So next slide. And besides that, this approach could improve the development of language proficiency. Teachers should act as the main guidance to conduct this approach in the classroom and to boost the awareness of the language among students.
Okay, so let's have here the stylistic approach. So, so let's have here the pedagogical aspect of stylistic approach. So stylistic approach teaches students how to look for and interpret stylistic dimensions of a text. So students are made to learn what is said and how meanings are made. So they are taught to know what makes the language of literature different from everyday language. So next slide, please. Let's have here the characteristics of stylistic approach. So for the first one, it applies linguistics to literature in the hope of arriving at analysis which are more broadly based, rigorous, and objective. Second, it represents a promising area not only because stylistic analysis involves both fields, but because such an analysis makes possible a more complex approach to literature. Third, focuses on the linguistic devices or applications at the phonological, lexical, or syntactic level, whichever proves to be meaningful in any kind of literary interpretation. Next slide, please. So let's have here applying stylistic approach. So or why we need to apply stylistic approach? So form is important in poetry, and stylistics has the largest armory of analytical weapons. So in applying stylistic approach, there are two major goals. First is to help the readers in making meaningful interpretation of the text, and the second one is to expand the knowledge and awareness of language. So these two major goals aims are helpful for students to read and study literature with excellent language practice. Next, please. So let's review the example of activities for stylistic approach. First is looking at the text closely. Second, mark certain linguistic features. Third, extracting possible clues. Fourth, contribute to meaning of the text. And for the last one, contribute to interpretation of the text. That's all for stylistic approach. Thank you for listening.
So that's the end of our discussion. Thank you for listening, guys. See you next time.